desperately need advice. They say words are just sounds strung together, meaningless without intent. But I've learned how wrong that is. Words carry weight, far more than I ever understood. They linger, sharp and unforgiving, long after they're spoken. Theo used to tell me I had a sharp tongue. I'd laugh, brushing it off as a playful tease, never once considering it might be a quiet plea for me to soften my words. Now, sitting alone in this empty apartment, I replay those moments over and over. The careless remarks, the offhand comments, and that one word, wimp. It was just a joke, or so I thought. But words can't be taken back. Once spoken, they settle, leaving cracks that grow over time. I didn't see the damage I was doing. Theo was steady, kind, and unwavering, and I took it all for granted. I thought he was unshakable, that no word of mine could break him. But I was wrong. Now the silence here is deafening, filled with the echoes of my mistakes. I pushed Theo away with my words, and now I'm left with nothing but their weight. When I met Theo, I wasn't looking for love. My last relationship had left me drained, and I convinced myself I was better off alone. Swiping through profiles on a dating app felt more like a distraction than a genuine search. But Theo stood out. His bio wasn't flashy or overdone. It simply read, lover of books, good coffee, and meaningful conversation. Hoping to meet someone kind. His first message wasn't much different. Hi Chloe, I think you have the most beautiful smile I've ever seen. Corny, yes, but it made me pause. We planned a low-key first date, a walk in the park and coffee at a small cafe. Theo was there early, waiting nervously by the entrance. He wasn't the type to command attention with bravado or charm. Instead, his quiet demeanor and earnest smile made me feel unexpectedly at ease. He fidgeted at first, stumbling over his words, but as the evening went on, his sincerity shone through. At the cafe, Theo admitted, I'm not great at first dates. I feel like I'm auditioning. The honesty disarmed me. Unlike the polished, self-assured men I'd dated before, Theo wasn't trying to impress me with a version of himself he couldn't maintain. He was just himself. In the weeks that followed, Theo's consistency won me over. He remembered details others would forget. My love for lavender, my habit of humming when I read. When I had a bad day, he'd show up with my favorite ice cream, no questions asked. Theo wasn't dramatic or flashy. His love was steady, quiet, and sure. A kind of love I'd never known. It softened the walls I had built around myself. I didn't realize then just how rare and precious it was, or how much I would regret losing it. Looking back, I can't pinpoint a single moment when things changed. It wasn't one big argument or a sudden realization. It was a slow, creeping shift, like cracks forming beneath the surface of something solid. Theo's unwavering devotion, which I had once found so comforting, began to feel heavy. In the beginning, I adored his selflessness. Theo was the kind of man who thought of everything. He'd leave little notes on the bathroom mirror to brighten my mornings, surprise me with my favorite flowers after a tough day, and plan thoughtful dates to show how much he cared. But over time, those same gestures started to feel suffocating. It wasn't that Theo changed, it was me. At first, I dismissed my frustration. I told myself, he's just thoughtful. Isn't this what love is supposed to look like? But deep down, I felt restless. I wanted him to push back, to assert himself, to show me that he had needs and desires of his own. Instead, Theo seemed content to let me lead, to always put me first. even when it came at a cost to himself. The imbalance in our marriage grew slowly. I began making decisions without consulting him, knowing he'd go along with whatever I chose. When I quit my job on a whim, I didn't think twice about how it might affect us. Theo didn't protest. He just adjusted, quietly picking up extra hours at work to make up for the lost income. At the time, I told myself it was fine. He'll support me. That's what a good partner does, I thought. But in hindsight, I can see how selfish I had become. I stopped contributing, not just financially, but emotionally. I let Theo carry the weight of our household, assuming he could handle it because he never complained. He took care of the bills, the chores, and me, while I drifted further into my own world. I began to resent his endless patience, blaming him for the very things I had once admired. I snapped at him over little things, a misplaced dish, a forgotten errand, without ever acknowledging the bigger picture. And Theo, in his usual way, absorbed it all. He never raised his voice, never argued back, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. His smiles grew smaller, his laughter quieter, and something in his eyes dimmed. The balance of our marriage had shifted so far out of place that I hardly recognized it anymore. I thought Theo's love was unshakable, that no matter what I said or did, he would always be there. I convinced myself that he didn't need as much from me as I needed from him. But Theo wasn't unshakable. He was human, and while he didn't say it out loud, I began to see the signs, the small ways he pulled away, the moments when his thoughtful gestures became less frequent. The way his eyes, once so full of warmth, began to carry a quiet sadness I refused to acknowledge. I thought love like Theo's could withstand anything. I thought he would always be there, no matter how little I gave back. I didn't realize how wrong I was until the cracks widened into a chasm I couldn't cross. By the time I understood what was happening, it was already too late. The night it all fell apart felt ordinary at first. Theo, ever thoughtful, had planned a romantic evening at home. He'd cooked my favorite meal, lit candles, and even put on the soft jazz music I liked. For the first time in weeks, things felt normal. We laughed over dinner, reminisced about our early days, and even talked about plans for the future. For a brief moment, it felt like we were reconnecting, like the cracks in our marriage had disappeared. But then came the conversation that changed everything. We were talking about bucket lists, sharing dreams and adventures we wanted to pursue someday. I mentioned skydiving, a thrill I'd tried years ago and loved. Theo chuckled nervously, admitting he could never do something like that. I'd probably pass out from fear, he said, laughing lightly. I laughed too, and then, without thinking, I said it. Oh, come on, don't be such a wimp. The moment the word left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Theo's face changed instantly. His smile faltered, his eyes dropped, and the warmth that had been there moments before vanished. He tried to laugh it off, but it was strained, almost mechanical. The room, once filled with light conversation, now felt heavy and uncomfortable. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just a joke, nothing serious. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. For the rest of the evening, Theo was quiet, answering my questions with short, polite responses, but never meeting my gaze. When I went to bed, I thought it would blow over by morning. I had no idea that one careless word would mark the beginning of the end. In the days that followed, Theo withdrew in ways I hadn't seen before. The little gestures I had taken for granted, the love notes, the surprise coffees, The thoughtful texts stopped altogether. He no longer made an effort to engage me in conversation or plan our evenings. At first, I told myself he was just busy or tired, but the truth was harder to face. I had hurt him deeply, and he wasn't sure how to recover. When I finally confronted him, he let it all out. "You called me a wimp," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and frustration. "Do you know what that felt like? I've spent this entire marriage trying to make you happy, trying to be the man you deserve. And with one word, you made me feel small. Like I wasn't enough. Like I wasn't a man." I stood there, stunned. To me, it had been a harmless joke, an offhand comment. But to Theo, it was the culmination of years of self-doubt and unspoken insecurity. My words, careless as they were, had pierced through every effort he had made to love and support me. I tried to apologize, to explain that I hadn't meant it that way, but the damage was done. Theo didn't yell or lash out. He wasn't the type. Instead, his silence spoke louder than any argument could. For the first time, I realized how much I had taken him for granted, how much he had given without asking for anything in return, and how little I had truly appreciated him. That night marked a turning point. The distance between us grew wider with each passing day, and no matter how hard I tried to bridge it, I couldn't undo what I had said. Theo, the man who had loved me so selflessly, was pulling away, and I was the one who had pushed him to the edge. I thought words were fleeting, harmless. I thought Theo's love was strong enough to weather anything, but I learned that night how wrong I was. Some words cut too deep to heal, and sometimes, even the strongest love isn't enough to fix what's broken. If things were tense after I called Theo a wimp, they became unbearable after he discovered the secret I had buried for years. A secret I thought would never come to light. It wasn't just one mistake. It was the mistake, the kind that changes everything. It happened long before we were married, back when Theo and I were still dating. We had been together for less than a year, and I wasn't sure if he was the one. I didn't see him then, the way I do now, as the man who would love me unconditionally. Back then, I saw him as safe, but maybe too safe, steady, but maybe too steady. And in a moment of weakness, I let myself be drawn into something I knew was wrong. It wasn't a long affair. It wasn't even meaningful. It was a fleeting connection with someone who gave me the thrill Theo didn't. I ended it almost as soon as it began, burying it deep in my mind and telling myself it didn't matter. After all, it hadn't affected my feelings for Theo, or so I convinced myself. But secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how hard you try to keep them hidden. I don't know how Theo found out. Maybe it was a stray message I had overlooked. Or maybe someone who knew had decided to tell him. All I know is that one night, his silence, already heavy from the strain in our marriage, was broken by words I never expected to hear. "Did you cheat on me?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp, like a knife cutting through the air. The room froze. I froze. My instinct was to deny it, to say anything to make the question go away, but the look in his eyes stopped me. Theo wasn't angry. Not yet. He was hurt, raw, and exposed in a way I had never seen before. "Yes," I said finally, barely above a whisper. "It was before we were married. It didn't mean anything, Theo. I swear it didn't." I'll never forget the way his face changed. The pain in his eyes turned to something colder, harder, something I couldn't reach. "If it didn't mean anything," he said, his voice trembling, "why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe—" He cut himself off, shaking his head as if trying to clear the thought. I tried to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but my words only made things worse. It was a mistake, I said. I wasn't sure about us back then, but I am now. I love you, Theo. I've always loved you. Don't, he snapped. The first time I had ever heard him raise his voice. Don't stand there and tell me you love me when you've been lying to me this whole time. You didn't even give me the choice to decide if I could live with this. The conversation spiraled from there. Every apology I offered seemed to deepen the wound. Every explanation only fueled his hurt. By the end of the night, Theo was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of a man trying to hold himself together. It was the silence of someone who had given up. A week later, he asked me to leave. If I had known, he said, his voice hollow, I never would have married you. Those words broke me. I wanted to stay, to fight for our marriage. But Theo didn't want to fight anymore. He didn't yell, didn't demand revenge. He simply retreated into himself, shutting me out completely. I packed my bags and left, feeling the weight of every mistake I had made crashing down on me. I had underestimated how deeply my choices, my lies, and my words could hurt the man who had loved me so selflessly. Now, I live with the silence he left behind, haunted by the realization that I was the one who destroyed us. Life after Theo felt like walking through a fog, everything muted, dull, and heavy. When I left, I didn't just lose my husband. I lost the life we had built together, the home that once felt so warm, and the man who had been my anchor. I moved into a tiny apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place you go when you're not sure where else to turn. It was small and cold, with creaky floors and walls that seemed to close in on me more with each passing day. At first, I told myself this was temporary, a pause before Theo and I could work things out. I'd give him time, let the dust settle, and then we'd talk. But as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, it became clear that Theo wasn't coming back. The silence from him was deafening, a constant reminder of the distance I had created between us. I found a job at a local cafe to pay the bills. It wasn't much, but it kept me busy. I'd wake up early, tie on an apron, and spend my days making coffee for strangers. There was something oddly comforting about the routine, about losing myself in the rhythm of steaming milk and pouring lattes. But every so often, I'd catch myself thinking about Theo. I'd see a couple at a corner table laughing softly, and I'd wonder if he ever missed me. Nights were the hardest. The apartment was too quiet, the kind of quiet that magnifies every thought. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying our life together in my mind like an old movie. I thought about the mornings he'd bring me coffee in bed, the way he'd always kiss my forehead before leaving for work, the way he made me feel safe in a world that often felt overwhelming. But with those memories came the guilt. I couldn't stop thinking about all the ways I had failed him, the careless words, the selfish decisions, the secrets I kept. I used to believe I was justified in my actions, that my frustrations with Theo were valid. But now, in the quiet of my solitude, I saw things differently. He had given me everything, and I had taken it all for granted. I tried to move forward, but it felt impossible. I made half-hearted attempts at rebuilding my life, going to work, smiling at customers, even joining a book club to force myself to interact with people. But nothing filled the void Theo had left. The apartment, the cafe, the book club. They were all just placeholders, distractions from the emptiness that had taken root inside me. Occasionally, I'd think about reaching out to him. I'd pick up my phone, scroll through old photos of us, and wonder if there was any point in trying. But every time the fear of rejection stopped me. What could I even say? That I was sorry? That I missed him? That I had finally realized how much he meant to me? Words felt meaningless now. Too little and far too late. One evening I found an old box of our things while unpacking. Inside were letters Theo had written to me, back when we first started dating. He had always been so good with words, capturing emotions I couldn't put into sentences. Reading them was like opening a wound I thought had scarred over. He had loved me so deeply, so completely, and I had let that love slip through my fingers. Now, the life we built together feels like a distant dream. I go through the motions, but my days lack the color and warmth they once had. I thought I was strong enough to handle being alone, but the truth is I never realized how much of myself was tied to Theo. He's gone, and I have no one to blame but myself. All I can do now is live with the silence, the guilt, and the unshakable regret of knowing I destroyed the one thing I thought I'd always have.